I've got this Bible at home. How many of you have a Bible at home that is like, it is your Bible? It is your personal Bible. Okay, I've got this Bible at home that is my personal Bible, and it has been my personal Bible since I was like 16 or 17 years old, which means that it's a decade old. All right, that's a pretty old Bible, and the Bible has seen some use. So it's missing some pages, which is kind of a problem from time to time. It's missing a few pages. I don't know where they got to. Some of the pages are torn or bent, and every page has like marker on it where I was writing stuff, you know? And it's kind of cool to be able to go back and see like things that I thought were a big deal when I was 17 and I don't anymore, and things that I didn't notice when I was 17 that I read now, and it just kind of blows me away. And since I was 17 years old, I would say I've probably had about 12 different favorite Bible verses. They just change. You know, like for a while, it was John 3:16, for God so loved the world. And then it was 1 Timothy 4:12 was my favorite for a while. Then there were a couple of Psalms, some from Jeremiah. I've had a bunch of these favorite Bible verses. But I've always had one Bible verse that's always been near the top of that list. Now, some of you probably have a favorite Bible verse because when you get sad, it makes you feel better, or when you get upset, it brings you comfort. And this Bible verse that I'm going to share with you does none of those things. I only like this one particular Bible verse because I think it's funny. That's all there is to it. I just think it's funny. They realized they were naked, so they sewed some fig leaves together. And I think it's funny because I can't imagine a situation where I am not wearing clothes, but I am unaware of that fact. And that tells you a lot about what Adam and Eve, the kind of different world they lived in. They lived the same kind of life that a guinea pig lives. Guinea pigs are unaware that clothes exist. And if you're unaware that clothes exist, then you would never think, I should wear that thing that I have no idea it exists. And if you don't know it exists, you would never recognize that there was anything wrong with being as naked as that guinea pig. He's a cute one. So the story goes that they're running around without any clothes, because remember, they don't know what clothes are, and they're in the garden for a while, hanging out with God, hanging out with each other, and one day Eve, the first woman that God ever created, is just hanging out, and this snake starts talking to her. And if I have one rule in life, it is don't trust a talking snake. But Eve, unaware of clothes, was also unaware that a talking snake was not the kind of creature that you could trust. And this snake deceived her. It deceived her into doing the one thing that God said they could not do, and that was taking a bite of fruit from this one particular tree. And everything else in the Bible, in the lives of Adam and Eve, and in the lives that we have today is a result of that one decision. We call it the fall. That's when the world went from how it was supposed to be to how it is now. And our story is struggling with the consequences of the fall. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how God responded to that. Before I do that, I want to deal with this one word, consequences. Because people throw it around a lot and people don't usually use it properly. Consequences are an unavoidable result of a specific action. They're an unavoidable result of a specific action. That means that if you dive off of a diving board into a pool that has no water, you're going to hurt yourself. There's no other way around it. This isn't something that, your friend wished badly upon you when you jumped and thought you would get hurt, and so it's your friend's fault. It's your own fault. If you don't show up for class and don't do your homework and don't study and you fail the class, that's not because your teacher is really, really mean. It's just because there's nothing they could have done. You don't do the stuff, you're going to fail geometry. And this idea of consequences is one of the most difficult things for me and for all of you to deal with, because we like to have someone to blame for the things that we do, when the truth is sometimes the only person that we can blame is us. Sometimes the only person we can blame is us. When I was in college, I used to love to go mountain biking. Mountain biking was my favorite thing in the world. And if you've never been really, really mountain biking, it's pretty nuts. You basically carve a path in a forest and ride a bicycle through it. So there'll be roots and logs and things you have to jump over and, animals that you have to dodge. And so I would go mountain biking 2 or 3, 4 times a week, and at least one of those times a week I would generally come home in some sort of a bloody mess because I wasn't that good at it. The worst mountain biking injury I ever had, and I've got this scar on my back that I can still feel through the 2 shirts that I'm wearing from this one injury. I was trying to descend what was called Scotts Hill. And Scotts Hill was called Scotts Hill because this guy named Scott was the only person that anyone knew who had safely made it down this hill. It wasn't really a marked path. It was just kind of a lane of trees with roots and some rocks, and it was very steep, and it looked like a lot of fun. And at the top of the hill was a sign that looked like this. And I decided one day I was going to give Scotts Hill a chance, because if I could conquer Scotts Hill, I would be a legend. And so I get going down this hill, and everything looked fine for about the first 7.5 feet. And then I noticed that there were these roots, and I was going too fast, so I squeezed my brakes a little too hard. And when you're going down a hill and you squeeze your brakes too hard, what happens is you lock up your front wheel, but the kind of back momentum keeps going, and you flip over your handlebars. And on this particular hill, you're going just fast enough that you slide all the way down to the bottom of the hill on your back. I slid down so hard that my shirt was torn from the bottom to the top. I was wearing like a backwards robe at this point, or a snuggie. And my back was ripped to shreds. Like I was in bad shape, and I'm just laying at the bottom of this hill thinking, thank God it wasn't worse than that. But the other thing you have to realize is that when bicycles are going down a hill, they don't just stop. And so I'm laying there thinking, thank God it didn't get any worse than that. But what I actually thought was, thank God it didn't get any worse than BAM! And the teeth of one of my pedals, you guys know the little teeth that hold your feet in place, catches me right in the jaw. And we had to walk about half a mile back to the car, and I'm just, in a world of pain. If you've ever been hurt like that, you know that you feel really, really bad when it happens, and then you go home and you go to bed and you wake up the next morning and you feel somewhere between 40 and 50 times worse. It's like everything has a chance to settle, the adrenaline wears off. I wake up the next morning, I can't take a shower because the shampoo gets in it's just terrible. You don't need any more details than that. But I remember feeling really miserable. I remember feeling really bad for myself, and my buddy that was with me, that he was going to go down after me. But he watched me go down, and he said, I will go around. So he emailed me and said, hey man, how you doing? And I emailed him back this real long, poor me, feel sorry for me email, and I said in it, I said, I'm completely miserable, I can't move, and I said, I'm starting to think that God's got it in for me. This is the email my friend sent me back. I said, I'm starting to think that God's got it in for me. I'm miserable. I'm starting to think that God's got it in for me. He said this, Aaron, that's completely ridiculous. God doesn't run around trying to hurt people. You went down a dangerous and stupid trail. You're not hurt because God wants you to hurt. You're hurt because you're an idiot. You did something dangerous and stupid, and when you do things that are dangerous and stupid, you get hurt. If you don't want to get hurt, play golf or video games. But don't blame God just because you're a moron. And I need friends like that. I mean, maybe he could have said it in a nicer way, maybe, but what I needed was someone to tell me, Aaron, that was your fault. You were the one that made the terrible, terrible, terrible decision. And sometimes, when you do that, you get hurt. And it's not God's fault, Aaron, that you were an idiot. That's what I needed to hear. And that brings us back to this story in the garden. If you've read about the fall before, you know that God is going to lay down some punishments. God's going to say, women are going to experience pain during childbirth. Men are going to have to work the land to get their food. And I'm not even going to talk about that today, because I want to talk about all of the things that happened before God laid down those punishments. The first thing that happens is what that Bible verse said. They realized they were naked, and they felt ashamed, so they sewed some clothes out of fig leaves. Up until this point, life had been perfect, right? Their lives had been perfect. And then one day, for the very first time in their entire lives, they were ashamed to be human. Or to put it another way, for the only and first time in their lives, they did not like themselves. God hasn't showed up yet. God hasn't talked to them yet. God hasn't done anything yet. This was something they did to themselves. They made a bad choice, and now they didn't like who they were. The next thing that happens is that they hear God or see God, or He's walking on a path in the garden, and so they run and hide, as if you can hide from God. And this is notable because it's the very first time that they have ever been separated from God. God didn't do that to them. They're the ones that ran and hid. God was on the same paths and the same trails, in the same garden, in the same places that God always was. Adam and Eve were the ones that moved. God hadn't even spoke yet. This was something they did to themselves. And then God finds them because, of course, God's going to find them. And He says, basically, hey, I notice you're wearing some funny clothes. And He says kind of another funny line, who told you you were naked? And then a third thing happens. God said something, but He hasn't called them out yet. He hasn't punished them yet. And Adam, for the very first time in his life, starts having conflict with Eve. Adam says basically this. He says, God, you know that woman? And this is what he says. This is in the Bible. You know that woman that you sent here? That you said was supposed to help? I would like to point out, God, she was not my idea. This was your idea. You sent her here, God. You said she was going to help me. Remember that? You sent her here. She said eat this fruit, so I did it. For the very first time, they're fighting with each other, and then Eve starts making excuses. And she basically says, well, see, what happened was I was just doing my thing, and this talking snake dude is like, you can eat this fruit. And I said we couldn't, but he just kept talking and running his mouth. And what had happened was I wanted him to stop talking, so I just ate it. Then God gets upset. But before God even has a chance to get upset, three things have happened. Number one, these people have stopped liking being themselves. They've experienced a disconnection from God. And the third thing is they've experienced conflict with each other. Those things are the things that we fight more than anything else. God's going to come up later and say, you know what, there's going to have to be some punishments for this, and women are going to experience pain during childbirth. And for most of the half of you in this room who will have to go through that, you'll have to experience it 4, maybe 5, maybe, 8. But the rest of that stuff, the consequences, the not liking who you are, the not liking the people you're around, and the disconnection with God is something you have to deal with every single day. Those weren't punishments that God laid down. Those were the consequences that Adam and Eve experienced because they did something stupid. Sin ruins things. People like to think that God ruins things because we sin, but the truth is, sin ruins things because that's what sin does. And Jesus Christ is the only one who can reconcile those sins and fix the things that we've broken. I'm going to give you some time to talk about that in your small groups today. There's a nice little surprise waiting for you in there. I hope you enjoy it. I want to remind you I will be hanging out after you're done with small groups if anyone wants to hang out with me. I'm going to pray for you, and then we're going to get out of here. Let's bow our heads.